In the desert, where the wind whispers forgotten stories, there lived a woman whose destiny was about to change forever. Her name was Zipporah. Daughter of a priest, raised among flocks and sand, her life seemed to be following a predictable course. But God had much bigger plans for her. That day, as usual, Zipporah and her sisters led the animals to the well. Under the scorching sun, they faced not only the flock's thirst, but also the arrogance of the region's shepherds. They always arrived later but demanded priority, pushing them away and taking the water by force. None of them dared to confront them. It was the rule of the desert. The strongest imposed their will. But then, something unexpected happened. A lone man, with dusty robes and a gaze marked by shadows of the past, appeared. He watched the scene for a moment and, without hesitation, intervened. He confronted the shepherds and ensured that Zipporah and her sisters could give the animals water. She watched him intently. Who was this stranger who fearlessly challenged those men? His face bore the traces of someone who had known another life, another place. He was not a simple shepherd, nor a mercenary seeking reward. His silence held secrets. Upon arriving home, Jethro, Zipporah's father, noticed that something unusual had happened. "Why have you returned so early today?" he asked. When he learned of the stranger who had helped them, he ordered that he be called to join the meal. Midianite hospitality demanded gratitude for those who showed honor, and so it was that Moses entered Jethro's house. Zipporah, in silence, continued to observe. There was something about that man that deeply intrigued her. Little did she know that this encounter was not accidental. Her path and his were intertwined by a greater purpose, a calling that would change their lives forever. Zipporah was not an ordinary woman. Her name means bird, and as such, her life was marked by movement and the need for adaptation. She was the daughter of Reuel, also called Jethro, a priest of Midian. Her people descended from Midian, son of Abraham with Keturah, and therefore had roots in faith in the true God, although their culture and customs were very different from the Hebrews. Unlike Egyptian women, accustomed to the luxury and protection of palaces, Zipporah grew up in a rustic environment, learning from an early age to cope with the hardships of the desert. As a shepherdess, she cared for her father's flocks, an arduous and often dangerous task. Midian was located east of the Sinai Peninsula, a dry land where only the most resilient survived. Her people were nomadic, accustomed to following the provision of the land and relying on the God of their ancestors. The presence of a priest like her father indicates that Midian still retained traces of the Abrahamic faith, even if mixed with other cultural influences of the time. Jethro, wise and respected, was not only a spiritual leader, but also an influential chief among the Midianites. This means that Zipporah was raised in an environment of leadership where she learned the importance of obedience, discernment, and faith. By marrying Moses, she not only united with a man, but with a destiny far greater than she could imagine. She ceased to be just the daughter of a priest and became the wife of a leader who would one day confront Pharaoh and lead an entire people to freedom. But at that moment, all she knew was that her husband was a stranger who carried secrets and an unknown past. Zipporah may never have imagined that her quiet life in the desert would be interrupted by such grand events. But God was already writing her story, preparing her for challenges that would test her faith, her courage, and even her marriage. If you enjoy inspiring Bible stories like this one, subscribe to the channel now and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. The marriage between Moses and Zipporah was not only a union between a man and a woman, but also a clash between cultures, customs, and beliefs. He, raised as a prince in Egypt, was accustomed to the refinement of the court, science, and the hierarchical structure of the Egyptians. She, the daughter of a Midianite priest, had grown up in a nomadic environment where life was simple but demanded strength and resilience. Jethro's decision to give his daughter in marriage to Moses was not taken lightly. As a priest and leader of his people, he saw beyond appearances. He saw in Moses not only a stranger, but a man marked by destiny. For Zipporah, marriage meant more than a change of status. It was a journey into the unknown. Moses possessed no goods, land, or position. He was a fugitive, a man without a past or a defined future. Still, something about him made him different. His sense of justice, demonstrated when he defended Jethro's daughters at the well, indicated that he had a purpose greater than himself. And Zipporah, even without knowing it, would become a fundamental part of that mission. The early years of marriage were marked by learning. Moses, formerly accustomed to the power and wealth of Egypt, needed to adapt to life in the desert. He learned to care for the flocks, endure the aridity of the days, and trust in the simplicity of God's provision. Zipporah, in turn, needed to understand the silent and enigmatic husband who carried shadows of the past. She realized that, despite her new home, Moses had never ceased to be a foreigner. Over time, the couple had children. The first, Gershom, received a name that reflected the father's condition. "I am a foreigner in a foreign land." It was a constant reminder that Moses had not yet found his true home. The second son, Eleazar, was born years later, and his name brought a new meaning. "The God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh." Moses now had a family, but God's calling was yet to be revealed. Zipporah did not know it, but the peaceful life she led with her husband and children would soon be interrupted. Moses' past would return overwhelmingly, bringing with it a divine calling that would forever change not only his life, but also hers. For Moses, the Midian desert was more than a refuge, it was a school. He arrived there as a broken man, fleeing a crime and a past he could not fix. But alongside Zipporah, he learned to see the desert differently, not as a punishment, but as a place of transformation. Zipporah already knew well the aridity of that environment. While Moses was accustomed to the walls of Egypt and the stone corridors of palaces, she had grown up under the open sky, guiding flocks and learning to trust in God's provision even when everything seemed scarce. Life in the desert demanded patience, resilience, and humility. Moses needed to forget what he knew and learn to survive as a true shepherd. And Zipporah was by his side during this process, helping him adapt to a reality that, for her, was as natural as the very air she breathed. The years passed, and Moses became part of that new life. Working for his father-in-law, he learned to guide the flocks through the arid terrains, to identify hidden water sources, and to understand the signs of nature. Each experience seemed ordinary, but without his knowing, God was preparing him for something much greater. Moses would learn to lead an entire people in the same way he learned to lead the sheep. Zipporah also played a fundamental role in his life. As a wife and mother, she maintained the home and raised the children with solid values. But more than that, she was a point of balance for Moses. While he faced doubts and internal questions about who he really was, Zipporah was a reminder that God had already given him a new identity and a new purpose, even if he couldn't fully see it. The routine remained stable until, on a seemingly ordinary day, everything changed. Moses, leading the flock through the desert, saw something he would never forget: a bush burning in flames, but not being consumed. There, in that sacred instant, he heard God's voice calling him by name. The time of silence had ended. Moses had received a calling that would change his life and Zipporah's forever. Moses' journey back to Egypt was not just a physical crossing, but a confrontation with his own past and the weight of the divine calling. God had chosen him to liberate Israel, but there was an unresolved problem within his own home, something that, before God, could not be ignored. As Moses, Zipporah, and the children made their way, one night became decisive. In a moment of mystery and tension, the Bible relates that the Lord came to meet Moses with the intention of killing him. Exodus 4:24. The exact reason is not explicitly stated in the text, but it is clear that there was something pending in his life: the circumcision of his son. Circumcision was a sign of God's covenant with Abraham and his descendants. It was a non-negotiable pact, a mark of belonging to the chosen people. Moses, about to become the liberator of Israel, had not yet fulfilled this ordinance in his own home, and God would not allow a leader to lead his people without first fully obeying the covenant. It was Zipporah who perceived the danger and acted immediately. Without hesitation, she took a sharp stone and, with her own hands, performed the circumcision of her son. Her gesture was quick and decisive. Then, touching Moses' feet with the cut foreskin, she declared, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." Exodus 4:25-26. Zipporah's words carry a mixture of frustration and understanding. As a Midianite, she did not grow up under the same traditions as the Hebrews, and circumcision may have been something strange or even unpleasant for her. However, in that critical moment, she recognized the seriousness of God's command and took the initiative. Her act saved Moses' life and ensured that the mission continued. After this episode, there is silence about Zipporah. By all indications, she and the children did not continue with Moses to Egypt. Some scholars believe that after this incident, he decided to send them back to Jethro's house, where they would be safe until the opportune moment for reunion. Zipporah, who had already left her quiet life in Midian, now faced a new separation. But her story had not yet ended. Soon, destiny would bring a new encounter and even greater challenges. After the incident of the circumcision, something changed. The silence of the biblical text about Zipporah after this episode suggests that Moses made a difficult decision: to send her back to her father's house, Jethro. Whether this choice came from Moses or was a divine command, we do not know. But one thing is certain: the mission he had received demanded a dangerous path, and taking his wife and children might be too great a risk. Moses headed for Egypt alone, but carrying the weight of separation. Zipporah, for her part, returned to Midian, taking her children with her. This separation was not only physical, but also emotional. As a wife, Zipporah saw her husband leave to face the greatest empire in the world, without knowing when or if he would return. As a mother, she had to raise the children without the presence of their father, explaining to them that Moses was fulfilling a greater purpose. While Moses confronted Pharaoh, the plagues ravaged Egypt, and the Hebrew people prepared for the Exodus, Zipporah lived in silence, outside the main narrative. But the fact that she was not present at this moment does not mean that her role was over. In ancient culture, a man's family was an essential part of his identity, and Zipporah's absence may have been deeply felt by Moses. The Bible tells us that sometime later, Jethro took the initiative to bring Zipporah and the children to meet Moses in the desert. Exodus 18:2-5. This indicates that the separation was not definitive, but a necessary pause until the right moment arrived. Jethro, ever wise, realized that Moses needed to reunite with his family. For Zipporah, this journey of reunion was also not easy. She would once again depart from the safety of her homeland to enter the chaos of a people in transition, living in the desert, without a fixed home. But as before, she moved forward. Her marriage, her family, and her faith would be put to the test again. The reunion between Moses and Zipporah was not just a family moment. It was a reminder that, even in the midst of grand divine callings, human bonds continue to be an essential part of the journey. After a long period of separation, Zipporah and Moses finally reunited. The trip was not easy. Jethro, realizing that it was time to restore family ties, took Zipporah and the children to where Moses was, in the desert, along with the people of Israel. Exodus 18:2-5. This moment was not just a reunion between husband and wife, but also a clash of realities. When Zipporah saw Moses for the last time, he was a shepherd, silent and reflective. Now she found a leader who commanded a multitude, spoke directly with God, and carried an overwhelming responsibility. The Moses who returned to her was not the same man who had left. For Moses, the reunion must have also been intense. He had experienced the glory of God, witnessed miracles, and led a nation out of slavery. But there, Before Zipporah and his children, he was not just the prophet of Israel. He was a husband and father. The battles he had faced in Egypt had been grand, but family continued to be an essential part of his life. Jethro, upon arriving, not only brought Zipporah and the children, but also observed the way Moses led the people. As a priest and experienced man, he realized that his son-in-law was overwhelmed. Moses spent the whole day resolving issues among the Israelites, personally attending to all disputes and consultations. Jethro, with his practical wisdom, gave advice that would change Moses' leadership style, divide responsibility, delegating judges to take care of the smaller cases, and leaving only the most important ones for him. Exodus 18:13-26. This advice not only brought relief to Moses, but must have also impacted Zipporah. As a wife, she knew the weight her husband carried. Now he would have a support system, allowing him balance between his mission and his family. The reunion of Moses and Zipporah is not detailed in the scriptures, but its meaning is clear. After a time of separation, God reunited them again, showing that, even in the midst of grand callings, family ties are valuable and should not be neglected. Zipporah was not just Moses' wife. She was a woman who sustained her family amidst profound challenges. Raised in a nomadic environment, she was already accustomed to a hard and unstable life. However, being the wife of Israel's liberator demanded more of her than physical resistance. It demanded faith, patience, and an emotional strength that few women could endure. As a mother, Zipporah had to raise Gershom and Eleazar in a context of uncertainty. First in Midian, far from her husband, and then in the desert, where survival was a daily challenge. Her children were heirs to two traditions, that of their Midianite father and that of Moses, a Hebrew called by God for a unique mission. How did Zipporah deal with this cultural duality in her children's education? The Bible does not give us details, but we know that her influence was crucial. After all, Moses would not have left his family in the care of someone who could not guide them with wisdom. As a wife, Zipporah lived between two worlds. She was not Hebrew, but was linked to the destiny of that people. Her marriage was not just a romantic union, but a bridge between different nations and cultures. She saw Moses transform from a simple shepherd into a powerful prophet, witnessed his internal struggle, and, in critical moments, was responsible for making decisions that saved his life. The Bible does not mention Zipporah after the reunion with Moses in the desert. This silence raises many questions. Did she remain by his side during Israel's journey toward the Promised Land? Did she return to Midian after reuniting with her family? Although we do not know for certain, her role in Moses' life was undeniable. Zipporah represented a woman who, even in the background of history, played an essential role. She was a pillar of support, a dedicated mother, and a wife who, in times of crisis, had the courage to act. Her story reminds us that often, someone's true impact is not in the spotlight, but in the decisions made in silence, in the daily sacrifices, and in the strength that sustains those who are on the front lines. Not everyone accepted Zipporah easily. Among those who questioned her position was Miriam, Moses' sister. In an intriguing episode, Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses, and one of the reasons mentioned was precisely the fact that he had married a Cushite woman. Numbers 12:1. This detail raises a question. Why was Miriam bothered by Zipporah? There are different interpretations for the term Cushite in this context. Some scholars believe it is a reference to Zipporah, highlighting her Midianite origin and possibly her distinct appearance from Hebrew women. Others suggest that Moses might have had another wife besides Zipporah. However, considering that Zipporah was already mentioned earlier as his only wife, the most accepted explanation is that Miriam's criticism was aimed at her. This conflict was not just a personal issue, but also a cultural and spiritual one. Miriam, being Hebrew, may have had difficulty accepting that the wife of Israel's great leader was a foreigner. Furthermore, Zipporah's position within the family may have caused tensions. As Moses' wife, she had direct access to the man God had chosen to liberate Israel, which perhaps was seen by Miriam as a threat to her own influence. The result of this confrontation was severe. God intervened directly, calling Moses, Aaron, and Miriam to the tent of meeting. There, God made it clear that Moses had a unique relationship with him, hearing his voice directly. As a consequence of the rebellion, Miriam was afflicted with leprosy and had to stay away from the camp for 7 days. This punishment not only restored Moses' authority, but also served as a warning that his choice of wife was not a mistake, but part of God's plan. Zipporah does not appear directly in this episode, but her impact is evident. The fact that Miriam questioned her presence shows that she occupied a significant role in Moses' life. Her story illustrates how God chooses and uses unexpected people to fulfill his purposes, regardless of human opinions. Zipporah's story is not extensive in the scriptures, but her influence is undeniable. As Moses' wife, the mother of his children, and a woman of faith, she played an essential role behind the scenes of Israel's great liberation. Her legacy is not in the words she said, or in the grand deeds she performed publicly, but in the silent actions that shaped the life of one of the greatest biblical leaders. Zipporah teaches us about adaptation and resilience. Raised in Midian, amidst a culture different from the Hebrew one, she needed to learn to cope with her husband's extraordinary calling. Her life was simple, based on the nomadic routine of the desert, but, alongside Moses, she was launched into a reality that demanded sacrifice and faith. Even without fully understanding what was to come, she moved forward. Another great lesson that her story leaves us is the importance of obedience. In the circumcision episode, she did not hesitate to act, even if the ritual was not part of her tradition. Her decision saved Moses and ensured that God's plan continued. This moment shows how, sometimes, God places us in situations that require courage and immediate action, even when we do not understand everything. Furthermore, Zipporah teaches us about the value of silent support. While Moses was in Egypt confronting Pharaoh, Zipporah remained far away, protecting her children. Often, the role of those who stay behind the scenes is as crucial as that of those who are on the front lines. We do not always see the immediate results of our faithfulness, but God sees and honors those who fulfill his purpose, even if they are not recognized by men. Finally, her story reminds us that God can use people of any origin to be part of his plans. Zipporah was not Hebrew, but was inserted into the history of the chosen people. This reinforces the message that God does not limit himself to traditions or human boundaries. He calls those he desires, regardless of their origin. Her name may not be as widely remembered as that of Moses, but her presence was essential for his mission to be fulfilled. Zipporah was a woman of strength, wisdom, and faith, and her legacy remains as an example of courage and commitment to God's plans. If you enjoy biblical stories like this one about Zipporah, I invite you to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next videos. Leave your like and share this video with a friend. May God bless you.